So even though he was still alive, the stroke made it so he couldn't really work anymore. So then Shemp came back. What a lot of people don't realize is that Shemp. What hat? I don't know what you're talking. Okay, 3, 4, beat it, do 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 do. Do 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 do. It's Wednesday. Hi. How's it going? I have to use the backside for something else. Another project I haven't done yet. But before that, Pixo the week. It was pretty, well, not a light week exactly, but everything I got this week is all stuff that I've been reading for a while, nothing new. So that'll be fun to talk about, won't it, for 5 or 10 minutes. This is Star Wars Bounty Hunters number 9, although I just file it under Bounty Hunters. This has been a really fun book. I don't remember if I even talked about the first. I think I might have. I actually made a list of every comic book that I read for this video last year. It's long. Anyway, this character here is named Valence, and he's a relatively new addition to the Star Wars canon. He's not appeared in any movies or television programs that I'm aware of. I haven't seen The Mandalorian yet, though, so what do I know? I'm pretty sure Valence is only canon now. Like, I think since, okay, so after the original trilogy, Lucasfilm delighted in licensing the characters out, and Star Wars wasn't as huge a business back in the 80s. So Dark Horse Comics ended up, Marvel did a Star Wars comic for a long time, but that was in the late 70s, early 80s. After, that was when the trilogy was still going, so interest was still pretty high. After Jedi, nobody gave a poop anymore except for little boys. And so Dark Horse started putting out Star Wars comics. And for the most part, I think, if I remember this right, there are a lot of them took place pre-Galactic Civil War, so like before the original trilogy. But this is all before the prequels were a thing. So when the prequels came out, that invalidated a lot of, and then also there's like hundreds and hundreds of novels, in the same spirit of the whole thing is like they pay George Lucas, and there's very little I think George Lucas wouldn't do for cash. Blah 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 blah. Marvel buys, or Disney buys Star Wars a few years ago, and Marvel Comics. So now they took the license from Dark Horse, which I think Dark Horse saw coming at the very least. So they were like, oh, we need to start putting out. They started putting out a Star Wars comic that was more just for the original trilogy types. I'm definitely taking way too long. My point is that this character is relatively new and is in the newest continuity, which is to say when Disney bought Star Wars, they went, okay, all that stuff that's not the movies that we own, and none of that counts. So we're going to start filling in the holes as we see it. And I'm fine with that, frankly. Because, I mean, the Star Wars universe is a lot like the Marvel or DC universe at this point, where it's so big and unwieldy that none of it is really plausible. But that's kind of the risk. That's kind of the trade-off of like a world-building thing, is you just kind of have to go, oh yeah, well, sometimes this isn't going to add up exactly right. So even though we had never heard of this character until a couple years ago, he had been in the Empire. He was a soldier in the Empire. He was a pilot. He was a TIE fighter pilot in Han Solo's squadron when they were cadets. And Valence was a very, 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 he was raised by an Imperial soldier who was, I believe, an officer. And so he was very much going to follow in his father's footsteps, and he was very by the book, loyal to the Emperor. Oh no, the thing I fixed is breaking. This hat. I was going to do that at the end, but I just do it now. You're right, I shouldn't do this. What the hell was it? Right. So Valence. Right. So Valence went into the Empire, and they start to get into this in the last couple issues. How like his father really literally beat fealty to the Emperor into his son, and then when Valence was a soldier, and he ended up becoming an officer too, so he was like head of a squadron, and they were on some mission for the Empire, and they were in a battle, and they got stranded, and the Empire just left them there. They're like, they're acceptable losses. So even though they were still alive, and then Valence so therefore quit the Empire, but he didn't want to be a rebel either, so he ended up becoming a bounty hunter. I guess I should have just said the Valence story. That was more interesting than anything I had to say, certainly. And then also this week I got the other history of the DC Universe #2, which I'd forgotten about because what I do every week is every Friday I look at the previews, which is the website for the Diamond Comics distributor, which used to distribute every comic book, and now only distributes them all except for DC. So since this is DC, I always there's other like websites I can go to see what else DC is putting out this week, but I don't generally remember because I'm not super into DC. Hold on a second. Can I turn these stupid grid lines off while it's looking at me? No? Okay, good. Anyway, that was Pixel Week. And then what Pixel last week? Okay. So last week I didn't know what I was getting into with any of these new books, but I was not disappointed at all. First up, I had, I guess not with all of them, but Crimson Flower #1. This was really good. The artist, Matt Lesniewski, I have not seen before. I meant to look him up, but very much in that similar to Brandon Graham, which we'll talk about in a second here, like in this very indie, cartoonish way. He's like an indie artist in that he's not drawing superhero stuff, but he's not drawing, swords and sorcery type. It's like these guys. Headlopper really falls under this too, where it's way more cartoony than you would expect for a story like that. This is very much a Matt Kindt story, though, which is great. This young woman here is like a monster hunter, and we find out over the course of this issue she's hunting a particular monster who killed her father. So not like the most original premise in the world. There's like magical supernaturalism going on and stuff too, but it's really good. I'm really looking forward to the rest of this, and the art is really what Lesniewski. I mean, I came from Matt Kindt, but I'm staying from Matt Lesniewski. Not that the story is bad. I also Rain Like Hammers #1. This is a very similar book, except it's more science-y fiction-y. This is our main character, whose name I've forgotten. I don't even know if he's named, because he lives in this it's very reminiscent of THX 1138, where this guy is living in, there's like, society's been reduced to these massive mobile kind of city-states. They're like these giant trawlers almost, and they're just kind of across like a wasteland. Like, we don't know if it's Earth or what, but it feels like it's the far-flung future, and this is like the kind of a post-apocalypse thing. So inside, though, everything's great. All your needs are met, and you're given a job that is really boring. So a lot of this is just kind of establishing the world. We find out over the course of the story as well, and Brandon Graham is a very good storyteller. He really knows how to let things out and kind of drips and drabs just enough to keep you coming, but not spoon-feeding you anything. But not either is he intentionally obfuscating things for like artistic merit, which is something, when people say sentences like that, that's kind of what they're doing. Oh, look at me, I know big words. I do know big words. I went to a college that's mostly accredited. So at the end of the, I don't want to blow it, but by the end of the story, it's apparent that not all is well in paradise, and that I think it's called Elephant City. I think all the cities are named after different animals. So Elephant City's in a lot of trouble. But it's very promising, and like I say, I've really been enjoying this kind of, I kind of give it up to Chris Ware to kind of start this interest in Silver Age era science fiction, like from the 60s, the early 60s mostly. And that a lot of science fiction, especially when like indie science fiction, is definitely, I think, in that wheelhouse. I don't know if they're all taking it from Chris Ware, but if Brandon Graham is not very familiar with Chris Ware's work, I'd be super duper surprised. And then finally, very much in the theme, and not at all, Iron Fist Heart of the Dragon #1. This is a lot of fun. This is definitely not something you need if you're not a super duper Iron Fist or Larry Hama fan to begin with, but it is really cool. The story is there are 7 cities of heaven, including Kunlun, which is where Danny Rand the Iron Fist became the Iron Fist. And each of these cities has a different dragon, and I think the dragon in Kunlun is named Shu Lao, if I'm not mistaken. That's who Danny had to fight in order to get the power of the Iron Fist. Somebody is apparently killing or trying. Somebody is trying to amass all the dragon's hearts in order to take over all the cities of heaven, and so that's Danny's out to stop that. And Taskmaster shows up, and I think I'm officially at the point where I'm like, okay, we don't need to use Taskmaster in anything. He's always been one of my favorite characters because he has that skull face and he's just kind of a general badass. But he's got his own series right now. He's in that Black Widow series, if I'm not very much mistaken. I think that's why he's showing up so much now, is because his character is also going to be in the Black Widow movie. Which I get it, and it's again just part of being a Marvel nerd, but also. So another thing I read this last week, I'm more or less caught up. I think I've got 4 comics aside from the ones I bought this week. So I did get to read a lot of stuff. But another thing I also got to finish this week was Swampnibus #1. I got halfway through another thing. I'll show you that. So #1. So this is a comic strip done by my friend Greg Pettix and his friend Chris Cilia, who I don't know. Scylla, sorry. But I know Greg from the old punk rock days. He was in a band called the Weird Lovemakers when I was in the Dissimilars, or right before I was in the Dissimilars, right around there. And we used to play with him. Oh, he was in a band called the Cuntifiers too. And so that was how I know. But he's also a super big comic book nerd. He's got an even better collection than me, if you can believe that. And he wrote this, I believe, when they were both going to college in Tucson, Arizona, where Greg is from originally. And I'm assuming Chris also. And so it was a comic strip that they did for their college paper. And if you have any familiarity with college comic strips, you know that they're nothing like, they're almost intentionally obtuse or, goofy. And Swank is no exception, but it's not the pretentious kind. It's very fun, but it's also very much jokes that Greg wrote for guys like us who, there's like references to old Steve Ditko comics and stuff. And it's like, yeah, this is a very select market, but it's perfect. So when he texted me that this was out, I bought it. You can go to lulu.com, which is like kind of like a self-publishing place. I think that's more or less what Greg and Chris did with this, was kind of just publish it themselves, which I definitely would like to do at some point. And I think that picks a body. All right, good. We're at 12 and a half, and I have to use the restroom, so this is as good a time as any. Yeah, so, Shemp was the original. Shemp was in the original with Ted Healy. I feel like we've gone over this.